We were looking to this graph, and basically we have looked to Argentina. Argentina is not the country with highest union density rate. Actually, that country is Cuba with 70.6%, and their union coverage rate is actually less than the union density, which means actually part of the unions are not doing collective bargaining process for their workers. In the United States, the union density is 10.7 at 2007. I think the ratio has fallen down since then, and the coverage rate is 11.8%. And that's Europe. In Europe, collective bargaining rates are not available for most countries, but for example, one comparable case is Denmark, where 1.5% is the density rate, and 95.6% is the coverage rate. Almost all workers are covered there in that case. The Nordic countries like Norway has 65.5%, Sweden 65.8% union density rate. In Germany 17.5%. In France 7.9%. In UK 7.4%, still significantly higher than United States, are the union density rates. In England, actually, unions are more dense than the highest density rate of the United States even. But that's the rate, and almost everywhere actually the density is decreasing, although that decreases at different levels. And especially, I mean, in current case, the typical employer-worker relation is kind of damaged, because now a worker can work for many employers. I mean, this specific type of workforce that is called the freelance labor is more in forefront, and how to unionize freelance labor is a question by itself. Service sector was also a sector where typical unions could not be part of for a long time, but nowadays actually you see more unionization in service sector also. Production could be more stable because you can produce and store things, a stable type of work, but service sector is also kind of agricultural work, not because working conditions dictate at certain time a higher level of labor demand, but more like the demand is fluctuating, and in some cases you might expect a higher demand at certain periods, basically. Now we can look to the union's effects on wages. Usually that effect is expected to be an increase for the workers that are covered by the union. You make collective bargaining, and at least average wages are expected to be higher than higher compared with non-union workers. That difference is called wage gap or wage gain, basically. So actually these are two different variables, but they kind of measure seldom union's effect. Wage gain is the variable which is measuring the increase created by the unions. So you can only measure it by looking the case when you have no union and the union. So it is actually gain created for all workers by the existing of the union. Wage gap is the gap between the union workers and non-union workers, basically. Well, how are the unions affecting the non-union workers' wage? This is something we will discuss. But typically, I mean, the wage gap is expected to be positive. Although there are some sectors where they are negative, and we will discuss why it is so. For example, this is United States. In construction, the union workers have a 51.7% higher wage. Manufacturing 7.2, public sector 21.1, transportation and public utilities 29.5, wholesale and trade 1.6. But in finance and insurance, for example, the union workers get 9.8% lower wage. That might be because they are more unskilled workers, and I mean they made bargaining in different type of companies working in finance, which employ relatively more unskilled workers and or low skilled workers. So the sectoral names are of course broad, which means actually part of the percentage difference is because of the typical workplaces where unionization is higher, the wage level might be lower, basically. Same effect might also exist actually here on the top parts. Maybe in construction, typical unionization takes place at places where the wage level is higher. I mean, so the actual difference might not be created by the existence of the union. So in order to test that, actually, a statistical analysis was run by, well, you can look to the details of the source, basically Lewis, I believe, and actually this is a combination of different sources, and you can see the number for different years, wage gap for different years. And you can see that the lowest amount was 45.49, where I mean the state's protection of the workers and regulations was higher at that time. And then, starting with 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the union density is falling down, but not necessarily the wage gain. Wage gain is highest at the 1975 and 1985, actually, the time when the attacks to the labor is highest. It has somehow decreased, but not decreased drastically and continuously after 1985. So union density is not necessarily correlated with the wage gain. This is one thing that this graph is showing to us. Well, how does the union's wage affect the wage level of the non-union workers? It affects it at least by two different channels. Although you might want to think of alternative channels, and it's certainly possible to find ones. But the two channels that are mentioned in the book are the threat effect, which means actually if in a sector, if you have unions existing in a country and unionization rate is increasing, but you are currently working in a sector or in a company where there is no union, the company owner might increase your wage to prevent basically you to join to the union. So this is called threat effect, actually. I mean, the threat of forming a union itself is basically make the employer to pay more. Also, unions might close certain sectors to the marginal workers like women and certain groups that are not able to be part of the union, and those workers might actually hired by them go to the non-unionized sectors and basically work there. As a result, the supply of labor in those sectors might increase, and that spillover effect, as a result, the wages in those sectors might go down. That's the second effect. So this threat effect and spillover effect, they are counteracting with each other, and net effect is not necessarily in one way or the other. It can be in both ways. So that's the end of this topic. Now we can start looking to the questions. So what is union density rate? It is the percentage of workers that are part of the union. How can an employer increase its profit level? Actually, it's not that good question, but in this case, we might say it can increase its profit level by decreasing the wage level or increasing the productivity level, basically. That's the two ways they can increase them. Profit level and productivity level can be increased by getting closer to the point where the average productivity of workers are highest. What is a parity improvement for workers and employers that are contributing to the production process? It is a kind of change in wage and employment level, which makes both the workers and employers better off in terms of their utility level. Of course, here you might talk on collective workers in collective sense. In that case, you might be talking on a union, and in some cases, I mean, a change that is pleasing workers in a collective sense might not please some single workers. Maybe that's a possibility. Or workers might basically just caring for their collective good, not individual goods. That might be possible, of course, as an assumption. Although how far it is true should be tested if we assume that. In reality, both this collective sense and individual sense of utility might exist at the same time for the workers. If we take also this individual case into account, I mean, we should just think an improvement. If we have multiple agents, Pareto improvement is still the case, which makes all agents better off, or at least some agents better off, and the other agents not worse off, basically. That's Pareto improvement. When do strikes last longer? They last longer when both unions and employers have high bargaining power. How are unions likely to affect workers who are outside of the union coverage? They can affect them by spillover effect by increasing supply of labor in those sectors, and as a result, decreasing the wage. But they might also affect them in positive sense through threat effect. I mean, the possibility of formation of union in those sectors might make the employers to pay more to their workers in those sectors. So draw a graph where vertical axis represents wage level, horizontal axis represents the unemployment level, ANRP and union utility curve, which intersect at highest possible wage level. For that ANRP curve, name the intersection point A. For the graph you draw, show which area represents parity improvement compared with A. Draw on the same graph another ANRP curve and which intersects union curve U1 at a point at which there's at a point which is Pareto efficient, U1, the old utility curve. Which means actually the employer should be better union as same utility. Another U2, and now you should draw a U2 curve at which the union is better off. Well, it intersects the old ANRP curve, which means union is better off, and the employer has same utility since the point is Pareto efficient. Now you should draw a new ANRP curve and the utility curve, which intersects at the Pareto efficient point where both union and employer gets a higher utility level. Let's go back. So this is the original the ANRP curve. Let's say ANRP2 curve, and U curve is the old curve, and the intersection point is A. Now, for the rest of it, we are very close to 15 minutes mark, so let's continue in the last part of this lecture.